expensive. But then again, so a lot of people could afford to have this kind of design in their houses. And it was just not just a flat one-color design, it had a little bit more interest to it. So it again, captured the imagination of the wallpaper buyer at the time. And this is a very good example of how the paper, you can see how the paper was put together at the time.
How did they do that as a wood block? Like, how did they get?
Well, it was done through the mixing the ink.
Different
It wasn't
applications,
done
or
with
mixing it in one application?
different applications of ink. With the
How did they
black.
get this sort of like,
Well, I'll tell you, I'm in the process of researching that right now. I'm not sure myself, but I'd love to find out.
right, that's what, how did they get that effect, is what I'm wondering. They would have had to, certain colors, they would have had to not apply to certain parts of the block.
Right.
But then there's, it almost looks like there's areas where, okay, like right in here, there's no particular design, but there is color. So for the darker blue, they wouldn't have applied it very much here.
Well, the darker blue was what I would call the stainer color. That was the darkest part of the color. And through mixing, say, a white with the color, this kind of rainbowing technique was developed. So you get different values of the same color through the color mixing technique, not so much in the printing technique. This is a great example of one of the Asian designs that were brought over from Asia. And I have some more fabrics here too. This is an embroidery. This was either a part of a bed hanging or part of a window hanging from that period. And this is not a wall cover, but this is, like I say, this is a Chinese embroidery on silk.
Now, is that something that also would have been inspiration for European wall covering designs?
Oh yes, very easily, yes. In fact, some of the fabrics were printed with the same blocks of wood as the wall coverings were printed, because some of the consumers wanted, the wealthier people wanted the wall covering fabric to coordinate or even match sometimes. But a lot of the times those people went to the weavers, the Italian weavers or the French weavers, and had the woven fabrics done for upholstery. And then for the bedding, they would have probably had the block printed fabrics for the bedding. It wouldn't have stood a lot more use. Here's another great example of an Asian fabric. This is a block printed fabric too. I like to bring along also block printed fabrics along with block printed wall coverings because the technique was widely used in Europe. I'll show you up until the early 19th century when the Industrial Revolution took hold over in Europe. Oh, I'm sorry.
That one's gorgeous, and I just kind of wanted to get
There you
out of
go.
that.
Now this is a multicolor fabric. This is French, and this was taken from a Chinese wall hanging. As you can tell, that first piece that I had up here, this is a very good example of a French example. I hope I have that right, hanging right. Here, well, this is the salvage. I'm sorry. I don't think I'm holding this correctly. Yes, I am.
That looks like it.
Yes, I am. I'm sorry. This is a multicolored floral fabric, and this is block printed in France. This is, again, the late 18th century from the Chinese technique. Beautiful example.
Where did you say this one was from? This one was...
That's French. This design type also came over from Asia. The Jacobean floral. These again were the tapestries were from Brussels and from Belgium, were copied from these kind of Oriental fabrics that came over from Turkey and other parts of Asia in the 17th and 18th centuries. Here's another block printed example of a Jacobean design. Very bold design and very, very heavy color. Again, this is a good example of a Jacobean period as compared with something much more delicate coming into the Rococo period. This is late 17th century, coming into the very early 18th century. Here's a little bit later, very refined French block print design. Again, Asian influence.
These would have been fabrics, not wall covering.
Oh, they could have been wall covering as well.
Oh,
Yes.
they could have been. Because I was going to ask, would this design would have been exactly reproduced on a wall covering, or they would have simply used the fabric as a wall covering?
Both.
Both.
If someone would have had the money to place the fabric on the wall, of course, that could have been done. But of course, that would be extremely expensive because, again, the fabrics were all hand-woven at the time. So that would have been extremely costly. These kind of fabrics would have been used more so for bedding, for chair upholstery, and that kind of thing, because of the cost.
So having that design printed then on wall paper would have been a more common?
Oh yes, much more common, and much more economical for the consumer at the time. And the same wood blocks would have been used to make the fabric and the wallpapers.
Oh, so you could use the same wood block for either.
But not the same as, yes. That was a very common, thing that was done. Again, economically, because what the craftsmen did, they just manipulated the inks for the fabrics, because the inks for the fabrics were not nearly as heavy. And coming into the early 18th century, all the wallpapers were made with inks that were made from varnishes, which took a long time to dry. Yes, and they were very they were somewhat caustic, but they were also very shiny. And this was not really something that was wanted on the walls. So the paper stainers in England and France came up with a technique which was called, let me think of the name. I'm sorry, the name escapes me right now. It was a specific kind of paint or ink that was utilized for wallpaper. Well, what was a technique utilizing different kinds of early chemically treated colors with water. Distemper, it was called distemper color. And all it was a water-based color. And it dried very flat, which was much more liking to the wallpaper users at the time, in the 18th century. As popular as wallpaper had gotten, this is a reproduction of a cardboard ad that was out in front of a Paris store. Wallpapers were distributed in stores such as haberdasher stores, paper stores that purchased and sold to the consumer any kind of paper that was utilized at the time. And so this would have been a cardboard ad that was placed outside of the store to show, and these papers would have been hung, just pasted right on this cardboard to show all the kind of designs that were inside the store to draw the consumer in, because there were many stores in cities such as Paris and London, and even in Italy also. There were a lot of wallpapers sold in Rome, and there were because of the decorative aspect of fabrics at the time. Italy was also very lucrative and very rich country in the 17th and 18th centuries. And so these kind of ads would have been, and were also placed in local newspapers as well in the 18th century. In England, the manor houses were owned by very wealthy men, and they had lots and lots of land, and they had lots of time in their hands. And with this time, they did a lot of hunting. So another type of wallpaper was developed, another design called, a room rather, in these great big manor houses called hunt rooms. And this is what the 18th century version of a man room, I guess, would be. And these kind of designs were developed by designers for these specific rooms. And these were either called prints or they were used as wallpaper. And they would have been totally covered on the walls, or the walls would have been elaborately carved with carvings, wood carvings, and then these designs would have been placed within the inserts of those carvings. And there would have been one design or many, many designs. The engraver might have made many designs for this room. And if the room wasn't carved with wood carvings, a wallpaper stainer would have made these decorative moldings to place around the prints.
So that's one of the examples you have of mimicking architecture or.
That's right, yes.
carved
This is a
wood.
great example of a wallpaper imitating carved wood, which was extremely popular. This again would have been block printed. It's done in 6 colors, and there would have been one major color. Now this red color, this brown color was not that popular a color. The most popular colors at the time were green and blue, because they were the most expensive colors to purchase, but also they were the most decorative colors. Dado borders were also very, very popular. And this is a very